Hello YouTube! In this video we're going to talk about the philosophical challenges raised by Boltzmann brains. So, what exactly are Boltzmann brains? Well, according to conventional cosmological theories, in the long-distance future, the universe will be in a high-entropy state of particles almost uniformly distributed in mostly empty space. But occasionally, just by chance, these particles will happen to form larger aggregates. Given enough time, these random interactions of particles will produce any possible aggregate of particles. Similarly, given enough time, a monkey randomly bashing the keys of a typewriter will eventually produce the complete works of William Shakespeare, along with every other possible finite text. Um, you know, so as it is with monkeys on typewriters, so it is with particles in the high entropy heat death of the universe. Eventually, just by chance, particles will happen to come together to form any physical object. Now, among the physical objects that will arise in this way are human brains. And for any given state of a human brain, these theories lead us to expect that at some point in the distant future, this brain state will arise through these random fluctuations. This is a Boltzmann brain. Moreover, it will arise an infinite number of times if the universe lasts forever. Now, of course, this point does not just apply to brains. In general, for any physical state, these theories predict that almost all instances of that state will result from random fluctuations away from equilibrium. So, if physicalism is true, that is, if consciousness is produced by physical processes of brain states, then the vast majority of conscious beings are Boltzmann brains. Now, note, of course, that when we're talking about Boltzmann brains, this covers not just standard biological brains, but any physical system that could realize consciousness. Moreover, not only are there Boltzmann brains, there will also be Boltzmann bodies, Boltzmann planets, Boltzmann galaxies. Again, any finite combination, any finite aggregate of particles will arise this way. But it is much more likely that a small system would arise than that a large system would arise. It is much more likely that a single disembodied brain would arise this way than that a whole planet or galaxy would arise this way. So there will be many more Boltzmann brains than there will be Boltzmann Earths or, Boltzmann Milky Ways. Still, again, there will be vast numbers of all of these objects. Now, the exact physical details of how all of this works do not need to concern us. We're interested in the philosophy. So what's important is that this picture of the future is arguably entailed by our best physical theories. So in the article Why Boltzmann Brains Are Bad, Sean Carroll argues that this is entailed by the widely accepted lambda cold dark matter model of the Big Bang. Now, whether this actually is predicted by these theories, again, that's kind of beside the point here. We can let the scientists work that one out. But we're interested in a more philosophical question. Is this a problem? Is it a problem if a theory predicts Boltzmann brains? Does it raise epistemological challenges? Can these challenges be answered? So let's call a theory that predicts Boltzmann brains a B theory. And the question is, what's wrong with B theories? There's a nice article by Bradford Saad called Lessons from the Void, What Boltzmann Brains Teach, which provides a nice summary of the problems. Saad points out that B theories seem to lead to difficulties if we assume two initially fairly plausible philosophical principles. So first of all, there is the principle of phenomenal internalism, which claims that in worlds with the same laws as ours, there can be no difference in phenomenal states without a difference in physical states, in particular brain states. There can be no difference in phenomenal states without a difference in brain states. The facts about the brain fix the facts about the mind. So it follows from this that the experience of being an ordinary human being is indistinguishable from the experience of being a Boltzmann brain, which is in the same brain state as the human. Many physicalists find phenomenal internalism very plausible, right? I mean, if we're a physicalist, we're going to say that consciousness is ultimately a physical process, and among physical objects, the most plausible candidate for the ground of consciousness is the brain. That's a pretty standard view. Um, so, so yeah, phenomenal internalism, right? Like, the mind is grounded in the brain. Second, there is the self-locating indifference principle, which Saad states as follows, I quote, "One should divide one's credence equally among hypotheses about one's location among those that are subjectively indistinguishable from one's own." So, to illustrate this, let's say that you are told by God that for every real brain inside a human body, for every normal, ordinary brain that's located in a human body, he has created 9 identical brains in vats, right? So for every for every like ordinary brain, there's 9 identical brains in vats, that are molecule for molecule identical to this original brain. So they have the same experiences. Well, in that case, the self-locating indifference principle would instruct me to have a 90% credence that I am a brain in a vat. Right? There's a 90% chance, given this information, that I'm a brain in a vat. And I mean, the basic point of this principle is that it's irrational for me to assume that there is anything special about me, at least in the absence of any evidence suggesting this. If I know that most observers who have an experiential state identical to mine are brains in vats, then I should expect that I am a brain in a vat. Again, in the absence of any other evidence otherwise. I mean, maybe God informs me that I'm not one of the brains in vats, but, in the absence of that sort of thing, no, it looks like I got to conclude that I'm a brain in a vat. And what goes for brains in vats goes for Boltzmann brains. So given phenomenal internalism, there are all of these Boltzmann brains whose experiences are subjectively indistinguishable from mine. Given the self-locating indifference principle, I should have a high credence that I am one of those Boltzmann brains. Again, it's irrational for me to assume that there's anything special about myself. So here's the sort of the issue, right? If a B theory is correct, if one of these theories that predict Boltzmann brains is correct, then I am almost certainly a Boltzmann brain. And that is a conclusion that a lot of people find troubling. But is there actually anything wrong with this conclusion? Well, let's consider some of the problems that might arise here. So, I mean, the first issue is that, well, B theories seem to lead to a kind of radical skepticism. If almost all observers are Boltzmann brains, then almost all observers are in a skeptical scenario, and that means that I am almost certainly in a skeptical scenario. I have all of these impressions of, being a body interacting with trees and fields and buildings. Those impressions are completely misleading. In fact, I'm a brain in a void that, just happens to be undergoing the right processes to create the appearance of a body in the world. So almost all of my beliefs about the world are mistaken. Now, this kind of external world skepticism has long been a challenge in philosophy. The standard skeptical argument, the sort of traditional skeptical argument, is often presented as follows. Premise 1, if I don't know that not S, I don't know that P. 2, I don't know that not S, so conclusion, I don't know that P. S here is a skeptical scenario, such as the brain in the vat hypothesis, or the dreaming hypothesis, or indeed the Boltzmann brain hypothesis, while P is a proposition about the external world, like I have hands, right? So if I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat, then I don't know I have hands. If I don't know that I'm not a Boltzmann brain, then I don't know that I have hands. Now, what this argument turns on is the fact that it seems that there's nothing I can do to rule out the skeptical scenario. None of my evidence contradicts the skeptical scenario because all of my experiences are just as they would be if the skeptical scenario were true. So this is the key point of premise 2, right? Like, I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat. There's nothing I can do to rule out my being a brain in a vat. And if I am a brain in a vat, I don't have hands. So So this is the sort of traditional skeptical challenge, right? Like, I can't rule out these skeptical scenarios. Arguably, B theories create a much more vicious kind of skepticism. So we can state the skeptical argument that follows from B theories as follows. If I have good reason to believe that S, I don't know that P. I have good reason to believe that S, so I don't know that P. Okay, the key point here then, here S is, let's say, the Boltzmann brain scenario. It's not simply that the Boltzmann brain scenario is consistent with our best physics. It's that our best physics seems to predict this scenario. So the skeptical scenario in this case is not some, philosopher's fantasy, right? It's a serious prediction of our best empirical theories. In the traditional skeptical argument, the problem is I can't rule out the skeptical scenario. I have no evidence against it. In the Boltzmann brain argument, by contrast, it looks like I have positive evidence in favour of the skeptical scenario. I have positive reason to believe it. And so that creates a much, it's rather more difficult to dismiss, right? Prima facie, okay? So we're not just saying, well, there's nothing I can do to rule out that I'm a Boltzmann brain. We're saying, no, there's actually, the fact that I'm a Boltzmann brain, right? This conclusion seems to be heavily suggested by some of our best theories. And so that's a rather more serious problem. Moreover, it's worth noting that some of the standard anti-skeptical strategies are going to have less application in this context. For instance, a classic objection to external world skepticism appeals to inference to the best explanation. The basic idea here is that although it is logically possible that I'm a brain in a vat, although it is consistent with my experiences that I'm a brain in a vat, even so, the best explanation for my experiences is the common sense hypothesis that my experiences are caused by objects like bodies and trees. I have a video which outlines inference to the best explanation as a response to skepticism, which I will link in the comments. What I want to point out here is just this strategy is presumably going to be less likely to succeed in this case because, well, inference to the best explanation is kind of what got us into this mess, right? The best explanation for various physical and astronomical data is a theory that entails that most observers like me are Boltzmann brains. So, the B theory just is the best explanation for the data, right? We have all of this scientific data and, we generate theories to try to explain it, and it turns out that the best theory is one that entails that most observers are Boltzmann brains. That's how this problem arose, right? So inference to the best explanation in this case, prima facie, looks like it does not undermine the skeptical scenario. Or consider, for instance, Morean shifts. So G.E. Moore famously suggested in response to the skeptic's argument that rather than accept the skeptic's premises and draw the skeptical conclusion, we should simply deny the conclusion and infer that one of the premises must be mistaken. So we say, look, I do know that I have hands, so either premise 1 or premise 2 must be false. So the claim that I know I have hands, that's more plausible than any philosophical premise that you could use in a skeptical argument. So if you present a philosophical argument that has the conclusion that I don't know I have hands, in fact, the sensible thing to do is just to deny the conclusion and then infer that philosophical premise must be wrong. Again, I have a video on Moore's argument, so I'm not going to explain it in detail here. I just want to note, again, it's going to be less plausible as a response to the Boltzmann brain argument because the Boltzmann brain argument is based on well-confirmed empirical theories. And as I discuss in the video on the Morean argument, Morean shifts are supposed to be targeted against philosophical premises, not empirical theories. Moore had no objection to the idea that science might overturn our common sense beliefs, as indeed it has done many times in the past. look, the Copernican revolution overturned a belief that was just accepted by everybody as normal common sense, right? Quantum mechanics seems to overturn a lot of our common sense assumptions about the way the world works. Well, maybe that's going to happen with B theories, right? I mean, it seems remarkable that there could be all of these observers who are Boltzmann brains, but hey, maybe that's just the way the world is. Again, the Morean argument isn't really going to have any purchase here. So, the picture then is that B theories seem to put us in a skeptical scenario. And if we take skepticism to be a problem, then that's going to be a problem for B theories. But of course, maybe skepticism isn't a problem. I mean, plenty of people will just embrace it. So before moving on, I just want to note, if you like my channel, you can join up to my Patreon. I will be uploading bonus videos, or I have been uploading bonus videos. There's already plenty of bonus videos available on the Patreon. I upload them about once a week. Or you can just send a one-off donation on PayPal. I also offer private tutoring. Send me an email if you're interested in that. And I have a Discord which you can join. The links to all of this will be in the description. Okay then, let's move on. So, the second objection that's often raised against B theories is that they are self-undermining or cognitively unstable. This objection has been made by Sean Carroll in Why Boltzmann Brains Are Bad. The basic difficulty here is, I think, pretty easy to see. Once I accept a B theory, this is going to undermine all the evidence I might appeal to in order to support the B theory. So B theories pull the rug out from under themselves. I mean, what could lead us to accept a B theory? Well, these theories are going to be supported by various physical experiments and observations. Let's say I analyse the evidence for different cosmological hypotheses, I analyse astronomical data, and then I come to believe a B theory. Okay, then it follows from the B theory that I am almost certainly a Boltzmann brain. But if I am a Boltzmann brain, I can't perform experiments, I can't analyse data. The data that I think I'm analysing never existed. The experiments apparently being reported by other people were never performed. Indeed, even my own basic observations of my own body are misleading. If I'm a Boltzmann brain, then none of my experiences can be trusted. So I should then conclude that there actually is no support for the B theory. Now, of course, as soon as I conclude that there's no support for the B theory, I can begin trusting the evidence again, and that evidence will lead me back to the B theory for the same reason it did initially. This is the cognitive instability. The evidence points to me being a Boltzmann brain, but only when I assume that I'm not a Boltzmann brain. Believing that I'm a Boltzmann brain undermines my belief that I am a Boltzmann brain. So this is the problem, right? We have, number one, I have strong scientific evidence in favour of a B theory. Two, so a B theory is likely to be true. And then three, if a B theory is true, I'm almost certainly a Boltzmann brain. But four, if I'm a Boltzmann brain, then I do not have any scientific evidence in favour of any theory. So, conclusion, in contrast to that first premise, I almost certainly don't have evidence in favour of a B theory. What I'm taking to be evidence in favour of B theory is unreliable, it's untrustworthy. I have to conclude that I have no justification for the reasoning and the evidence that I have used. So this is the problem. Now, according to Carroll, cognitively unstable theories are unacceptable. So he suggests that we should set our prior for a B theory to be 0, or at least close to 0. I mean, so suppose I set my initial credence in any B theory to be exactly 0. Well, in that case, no empirical evidence could ever convince me to accept this theory, at least on the standard Bayesian approach to updating beliefs. No matter how strong the scientific evidence is in favour of a B theory, if my initial credence in that theory is 0, I'm never going to budge. Right? I'm never going to have a high degree of belief in such a theory. Indeed, I'm never going to budge from 0. So, this is certainly one way of ruling out B theories, is just to say, well, given that B theories are cognitively unstable, we just have a credence of 0 in them. So Carroll recommends that we revise scientific methodology. Cognitively unstable theories are acceptable. They have to be assessed by different standards. Indeed, in a sense, cognitively unstable theories are just never subject to standard scientific assessment. We never put them to the tribunal of evidence. We never put them into conflict with other theories. They never enter the arena because, but I guess the point is that the trouble with a cognitively unstable theory is, in some sense, it sort of can't be tested against the evidence in the standard way, because as soon as you accept the theory, the very evidence that supports it, or that's supposed to support it, or indeed that's supposed to question it, right? All of the evidence becomes brought into question. So you can't test it against the evidence as you would with other theories. Now, there are a couple of difficulties with this idea. A first difficulty is, B theories, so what I'm calling B theories, they're not necessarily like singular unified theories. This prediction of Boltzmann brains follows from conjunctions of hypotheses which in themselves need not entail Boltzmann brains, and each of which are very well confirmed. So the hypothesis that the universe will undergo heat death and expand indefinitely, that does not in itself entail that there will be Boltzmann brains. Similarly, standard statistical mechanics does not in itself entail that there will be Boltzmann brains. So the point is, it's only when you have these different theories and you put them together that you get the conclusion, you get the prediction that there will be Boltzmann brains. The problem is we have some theory T1, which does not in itself entail Boltzmann brains and which is very well supported by the evidence. We have theory T2, which does not in itself entail Boltzmann brains and which is very well supported by the evidence. Okay, so far no problem. But then we find that T1 plus T2, that's consistent, but it does entail Boltzmann brains. So Carroll is going to say, well, you assign a prior of 0 to T1 plus T2. Okay, but then what do we say about T1 and T2? The evidence supports them, right? The evidence supports T1, the evidence supports T2. Do we then also have to assess these by different standards? Do we say, well, since we, or what? Do we just sort of compartmentalize our beliefs? We say, well, we believe T1 on Mondays and believe T2 on Tuesdays. It's not entirely obvious, right? So, I guess the sort of general concern here is that to say, well, you just assign a prior of 0 to any theory that entails Boltzmann brains, that seems like less of a solution to the problem than just ignoring the problem. That's one worry. But another concern here is, this claim that we should assign low credence to cognitively unstable theories has very implausible results in other contexts. Matthew Kotzen, in his article What Follows from the Possibility of Boltzmann Brains, considers the case of an aeroplane pilot weighing the evidence for the hypothesis that she has hypoxia. Hypoxia is a condition in which the body and brain are deprived of adequate oxygen. Hypoxia can seriously impair reasoning, but to the person who has hypoxia, everything is perfectly fine. Hypoxic individuals are often completely unaware that their reasoning has been impaired, and there are not usually any obvious signs of illness. This is a very serious risk for airplane pilots. There have been plenty of pilots who have, crashed as a result of hypoxia, just completely unaware that anything was wrong. Okay, so suppose that I'm piloting an aircraft and I consider this hypothesis. I have hypoxia. This hypothesis is cognitively unstable. I know that hypoxia causes people to reason poorly, even while believing that everything is fine. So I know that if I were to become confident that I have hypoxia, then I should stop trusting my own reasoning capacities. As soon as I become confident that I have hypoxia, I lose any justification for believing that I have hypoxia. And so that means that this hypothesis, I have hypoxia, is cognitively unstable, in just the same way that the belief that I'm a Boltzmann brain is cognitively unstable. Does it follow then that I should assign, zero credence to the hypothesis that I have hypoxia? Well, surely not. I mean, it would be totally absurd to instruct pilots to always assign a low credence to this. If anything, we want to encourage them to have a tendency to assign a higher credence to it than what they might initially be inclined to assign, right? Like the whole problem with hypoxia is like, okay, everything seems fine. So, what we want to drill into pilots is, look, you will be inclined to feel like you're perfectly fine, but you need to kind of make a habit of resisting that. So, I mean, but anyway, the moral here is we can't disregard a hypothesis merely because it's cognitively unstable. Sometimes it's just a sad fact of life that we find ourselves in situations where a hypothesis can be true, but the very truth of this hypothesis undermines our justification for believing it. Because, if the hypothesis is true, then that means that there's something going wrong with me. There's something going wrong with my reasoning, with my evidence, or something like that. Okay, so a third potential difficulty for B theories is that B theories lead to problematic predictions of disorder. Now, in fact, there are two different ways to state this problem. The first way is to say that B theories predict diachronic disorder. This is disorder over time. So B theories predict that my subsequent observations will be disordered, and this is because if I'm a Boltzmann brain, it's very likely that I will be consumed by the void within the next few seconds. A brain is not going to function normally for very long in empty space. I mean, almost certainly. Very occasionally there will be Boltzmann brains that get lucky and do function for a long time, but the vast majority of them will not. So Richard Feynman once put this point as follows. From the hypothesis that the world is a fluctuation, all of the predictions are that if we look at a part of the world that we have never seen before, we will find it mixed up and not like the piece we just looked at. If our order were due to a fluctuation, we would not expect order anywhere but where we have just noticed it. Now, of course, it's also true that for any, if the Boltzmann, if a B theory is correct and there are these infinite Boltzmann brains, then for any series of experiences, it's going to be more likely that this series of experiences is realized by a Boltzmann brain. So there will be zillions of Boltzmann brains that have perfectly coherent series of experiences over a long period of time. But if you just take a series of experiences up to a particular time, so like, E1, E2, E3, right? The question is, what is likely to happen next? Well, the vast majority of Boltzmann brains that have that series of experiences will become disordered very quickly. Only a tiny fraction continue to have organized experiences. That tiny fraction is a large number, but it's still only a tiny fraction. So basically, yeah, I mean, if a B theory is correct, then I'm almost certainly a Boltzmann brain, and if I'm almost certainly a Boltzmann brain, I should expect that the order in my experience will very quickly dissolve. But of course, that doesn't happen. I can, I notice order in my experience. I predict the order will continue, and that prediction is confirmed over and over and over again, continuously, every day. So I'm almost certainly not a Boltzmann brain. Now, there is an obvious difficulty with this type of argument. The idea behind this argument is I can confirm that I'm almost certainly not a Boltzmann brain by just waiting a second, and if my ordered experience continues, then then that refutes the Boltzmann brain hypothesis. The problem is that it doesn't seem like I'm going to have any grounds for trusting this procedure, because this procedure takes place over time. But it's just sort of built into Boltzmann brain skepticism that I can't trust my memories, right? The problem is that I can't experientially distinguish being an ordinary human who has waited a second from being a Boltzmann brain who has just now come into existence with the false memories of waiting a second. So I have a video on memory skepticism for more on skepticism about the past. Again, I will put the link in the comments. But yeah, Boltzmann Brains skepticism just builds this in. It's just already part of the skeptical scenario here. Um, I mean, and this is why the theory runs into this problem of cognitive instability. The vast majority of Boltzmann brains, with experiences indistinguishable from mine, are very short lived and have false memories. So I'm probably very short lived and have false memories. But then, since this scenario already entails skepticism of the past, it seems pretty clear that no procedure which takes place over time and so requires me to trust my memories, to trust that the past is as it seems to be, is going to pose any threat to this scenario. So diachronic disorder doesn't seem to help rule out that I'm a Boltzmann brain. Well, next though, there is the fact that B theories predict synchronic disorder. B theories predict disorder at any particular time. So if a B theory is true, then the vast majority of observers are Boltzmann brains, and that means the vast majority of observers will have disordered experiences at any given moment. So the fact that right now I don't have disordered experiences is evidence against these theories. Okay, so first of all then, this claim that my current experiences are not disordered, right? My present experience, my experience right now in this moment is ordered and coherent. So, my perceptual experiences present a coherent picture of the world. For instance, I can kind of see the computer in front of me. I have a visual impression of the computer. If I reach out with my hands, I can touch the computer, and I can like simultaneously see and feel the computer. So my senses all agree with each other. My memories seem to conform to this. Okay, so as I am visually perceiving and touching the computer, I also remember entering my room 5 minutes ago and sitting down and starting the computer. So like that's all within my present experience. My present experience is this ordered, coherent picture of the world where I have like ordered sensory impressions that cohere with my memories and so on. Now, consider a Boltzmann brain fluctuating into existence. The Boltzmann brain randomly samples from the space of possible brain states. But the vast majority of possible brain states that produce experience would produce disordered experience, because there are many more ways to be disordered than ordered. Now, of course, what's meant by disordered experience is a little bit unclear, but I mean, look, there's no reason to expect the sensors to be consistent with one another. There are many more ways for the sensors to be out of order with each other than for them to be coherent with each other. Similarly, there are many more ways for like memories to be out of order, to be incoherent with the sensors than there are for them to be coherent. So the vast majority of Boltzmann brains, of conscious Boltzmann brains, are going to have these disordered experiences where their sensors, their memories, and so on just don't present a coherent picture of the world. So, since that's the vast majority of observers, well, that I should expect my experience to be disorderly, but of course it isn't. Here's an analogy from Matthew Kotzen in that article I mentioned, What Follows from the Possibility of Boltzmann Brains. Suppose that God tells you that you are going to be recreated in one of two worlds. So in world A, there are 1 billion observers that are going to be created, one of whom will be created in a red room, and all the rest are created in blue rooms. In world B, 100 observers will be created, all of whom will be in red rooms. You then wake up in a red room. Well, in this situation, it seems like you have very strong evidence that God has put you in world B. Because had you been created in world A, you almost certainly would have found yourself in a blue room, not a red one. And of course, this is going to be the same, even if it's not just one person in a red room. If in world A, 1,000 people get created in a red room, that really doesn't make any difference. The fact that well, it makes a bit of difference, but even so, like, probably you're in world B. And And the same point applies to Boltzmann brains, right? So you can imagine world A, there are zillions of Boltzmann brains, the vast majority of which have disordered experiences. In world B, there are far, far fewer ordinary observers, the vast majority of which have ordered experiences. So the fact that I find myself with ordered experiences is evidence that this is world B. It's evidence that I am not in the sort of world that is described by a B theory. I'm not in a Boltzmann brain world. Now, there are a couple of objections we might raise to this argument. First of all, why should we assume that the majority of possible experiences would be disorderly? I mean, maybe, for some reason, consciousness requires some degree of order and coherence. I mean, at present, we know very little about what is required to realize consciousness, but one thing that might be worth considering is, well, have you ever actually had a disordered experience? I mean, there's all sorts of different states of consciousness, altered states of consciousness. Think about dreams, drugs, mental disorders, brain damage. These all lead to radically different types of experience, but those experiences, I think, appear to be at least internally coherent, at least at a given moment. I mean, so, look, I've had plenty of dreams that have had kind of disordered narratives, but in any given moment, I'm often presented with a coherent picture of a scene. Similarly, like drugs, if you look at reports of, hallucinogenic drugs, well, that creates radically different kinds of experiences, but, in themselves, those experiences don't seem to be disordered in any sense. There's they have they're all different, but it's not clear in what sense they would be disordered. And so, anyway, this might suggest that the space of possible experience is more limited than the argument assumes, right? Maybe it's just part of the nature of consciousness that it arises from a kind of ordering, a kind of coherence of of processes of experience. We might also question the analogy, the inference rather, that the argument makes. So consider this analogy. On standard common sense views of the mind, the vast majority of observers are non-linguistic, because on common sense views of the mind, animals have minds. Animals are conscious. There's lots of conscious animals. So almost all the billions upon billions of animals in the history of the world have been non-linguistic, right? They have experiences, but these experiences are not linguistic experiences. They do not have language. But I can use language. So this gives me evidence against those standard views of the mind. It gives me evidence against the hypothesis that the vast majority of observers are non-linguistic. Now, this kind of reasoning probably seems quite strange. Most people would probably want to resist this argument. You'd say, look, the fact that I have language, that has no bearing on whether other observers are linguistic, or that doesn't sort of refute the claim that the vast majority of observers are non-linguistic. But I mean, suppose we were to accept it, right? Suppose we were to accept that, yes, the fact that I can use language gives me evidence that it gives me evidence against the hypothesis that the vast majority of observers are non-linguistic. And actually, that might be fair enough. I mean, in the absence of any other evidence, you assume that you are typical. So, if there's a theory which says that the vast majority of observers are non-linguistic, and I find that I can use language, maybe that is evidence against that theory. If we consider just this hypothesis and just this piece of evidence, then okay, maybe that's reasonable. The problem is that I also have plenty of evidence in favour of the standard view. I have plenty of evidence in favour of the hypothesis that there are non-linguistic observers, and this outweighs the evidence that we just saw against it. And of course, the same point can be made for B theories. The fact that my experiences are ordered, maybe that does give me evidence against B theories, because on the B theory, the vast majority of observers have disordered experience. But I also have evidence in favour of B theories from our best sciences. When assessing whether to accept a hypothesis, we have to look at all the evidence, and I mean, very often that's going to lead me to the conclusion that I'm not a typical observer. Sometimes the evidence leads me to conclude that I am not typical. I can't sort of take it as some, immovable presupposition that I am in fact typical, that I am a typical observer. So, yeah, maybe most observers are non-linguistic and I just got lucky and I can use language, right? Similarly, maybe most observers have disordered experiences. I just got lucky with this nice, ordered, coherent experience. So, yeah, the argument is that neither diachronic nor synchronic disorder is going to give us a reason to reject B theories. Alright then, well, before ending this video, I want to look at an argument for the view that B theories are not in fact problematic at all. So, we've just seen a few different ways in which we might think that B theories are troubling, but not everybody agrees with that. So some people are quite happy to embrace the claim that the vast majority of observers are Boltzmann brains. So this comes from Dogramci. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. But it's the article, "Does my total evidence support that I'm a Boltzmann brain?" Now, the supposed problem with B theories arises like this. First of all, there's good evidence that there are zillions of Boltzmann brains with experiences indistinguishable from mine. And then second, there is a statistical inference. So the conclusion that I am almost certainly a Boltzmann brain rests on me making this inference. If the vast majority of the zillions of Fs are Gs, and I am an F, then I should have high credence that I am a G. Now, Dogramci objects to this statistical inference, because suppose that I also have evidence that this particular F is H, and that most FHs are not Gs. Then even given the fact that the vast majority of Fs are Gs, I need not infer that this particular F is a G. Rather, I should be confident that this particular F is not a G. So Dogramci appeals here to the principle of total evidence, which says that when evaluating any hypothesis, we must consider all of our evidence, not just some subset of our evidence. This is the same point we made in the previous section just a couple of minutes ago, right? So, when evaluating whether or not I'm a Boltzmann brain, it's not enough to ask simply, is there good evidence for a B theory? Right? When I'm considering whether or not I'm a Boltzmann brain, I have to take into account everything. I have to take into account the evidence concerning how I learned that most brains are Boltzmann brains. What's relevant is not just the fact that most brains are Boltzmann brains, it also matters how I learned this. And when I reflect on this, Dogramci says, I see that I have strong evidence that I'm not a Boltzmann brain. So here's how this works. I'll quote him at length here. He says, "How do we learn that most minds like mine are Boltzmann brains? We learn this only via acquiring a huge batch of scientific evidence. That batch includes in it lots that says we're in ordinary human bodies, on ordinary Earth, which has existed and circled the sun for billions of years, and so on and so on. We are FHers who see through scientific reasoning that there are going to be lots of Fs in the universe that are Gs. But that is not evidence that we are a G. We are not a G, i.e. not a Boltzmann brain." Alright, what's the point here? Well, the basic idea is I have acquired a great deal of scientific evidence in favour of a B theory, which entails that there will be zillions of Boltzmann brains with experiences indistinguishable from mine. But all of this evidence is available to me only because I'm not a Boltzmann brain. The evidence will include common sense observations, such as that I have a body, that I'm looking through a telescope, plus technical data from physical experiments and astronomical observations. By reasoning through this evidence, I come to the conclusion that there will be zillions of Boltzmann brains, but this evidence in itself presupposes that I'm not a Boltzmann brain. So when I consider all my evidence, I should judge it to be very unlikely that I am a Boltzmann brain. I mean, this point is similar to, the point made in the argument from cognitive instability, but according to Dogramci, B theories are not cognitively unstable. Indeed, the very feature that supposedly makes them cognitively unstable is exactly what gives me evidence that I'm not a Boltzmann brain. So, ordinary scientific evidence supports a B theory, according to which most observers are Boltzmann brains. But Dogramci takes this to show not that B theories are cognitively unstable, but simply that ordinary scientific evidence is always going to be part of my total evidence, and therefore I shouldn't infer that I'm likely a Boltzmann brain. It's part of my ordinary evidence that I have an ordinary body, that I live on an ordinary planet that's circled the sun for millions of years, and so on. Okay, so B theories are not unstable. I can hold that the scientific evidence supports the conclusion that there will be zillions of Boltzmann brains without making the inference that I am probably a Boltzmann brain. Instead, I should say, look, I have a body. I have made observations through a telescope. I've done this, I've done that. Boltzmann brains can't do any of that, right? So that blocks the inference that I'm a Boltzmann brain. Now, there's a fairly obvious concern about this response, which is, let's say that we take any one of the zillions of Boltzmann brains whose experiences is indistinguishable from mine. Don't we share exactly the same evidence? I mean, certainly it will seem from, the subjective first-person point of view, it will seem to each of us that, it will seem to be the same evidence. So it looks like the Boltzmann brain should also conclude that it is not a Boltzmann brain. I mean, in that case, the evidence will be misleading, but it's the same evidence I have. In fact, Dogramci simply accepts this consequence. He says that the total evidence for both me and for the zillions of Boltzmann duplicates of me supports the claim that we are all ordinary people. So as Dogramci puts it, we should all conclude, me and the Boltzmann brains, that we are in the good case. All of the zillions of Boltzmann brains should think that they are not Boltzmann brains. I will be right, they will be wrong, and we'll all be rational. Now, of course, this is a rather odd consequence. So, my total evidence is almost always radically misleading about the way the world is. The vast majority of observers who share my total evidence will come to completely the wrong conclusion. I mean, there is something a bit strange about the idea that like total evidence could be radically misleading in this way. Like, how could some set of evidence be said to support the conclusion that I'm an ordinary person if in the vast majority of cases where observers have exactly the same evidence, they are not ordinary people? I mean, it looks like there's no link there between the evidence and the truth. Like, the problem is the evidence is no longer reliably indicating the truth, right? So by Dogramci's own lights, this evidence does not reliably indicate the truth, given the way the world is, at least, right? Given the fact that there are these zillions of Boltzmann brains. So that is perhaps strange, but yeah, that's the idea. Well, that's all for today. Those were some of the epistemological challenges raised by Boltzmann brains. I hope you found that interesting, and I will hopefully see you in the next video if I am not consumed by the void within the next second. Okay, goodbye everybody.